I'd like to welcome you to the next episode of the Women in Rugby League Pioneering Years. And it's my absolute pleasure to have a pioneer of women's rugby league, but also rugby league, and is now a member of the Rugby League Roll of Honour, who has done so much for the women's game, but also women's sport, and continues to champion women's rugby league in all that she does. Jackie Sheldon, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think when we sort of were chatting before we were looking at, well, what do we really want to get from this interview? And part and parcel of this is around finding out who Jackie Sheldon is and what drove her and what her background was in order to get involved in sport and then rugby league, and obviously achieve so much. So I'd sort of be really interested in sort of those early years of your life and where you were growing up in Featherstone, and how you then sort of then forged a career, a very successful career in the sport.
Right. Well, I was born in Featherstone, and I was born into a mining family. 1962. That makes me 62 this year. So, knocking on a bit. And I had two brothers at that time, and it was 1962. Featherstone, I don't know for those that don't know it, to me, in my mind, it was a long street from North Featherstone down to South Featherstone, a community based around a pit, and a rugby league club, which is Featherstone Rovers. A very tight-knit community, and that's where my early years were. When I was living in Featherstone, my mum and dad divorced, and so I spent quite a lot of time with my grandmother, which is my mum's mum. And I don't know definitely, but I hear from my mum that her mum, so my great grandmother, was a life member of Featherstone Rovers Rugby League, and I can remember earliest memories of rugby league are around on a Saturday afternoon. My grandmother had a routine of watching the wrestling, Big Daddy, Giant Haystacks, followed by, or it might be the other way around, followed by the rugby. And she used to sit there religiously, and I used to sit there and watch this game of rugby. And also through school, we had a big family, so I had cousins, three of the boys. Len, Ian and Michael, they used to play at school, and it was played by boys at school. And I can remember, is it 1967 when Featherstone Rovers won the Cup, Challenge Cup final? I can remember in school making all the ribbons, the rosettes, and the whole community coming out when the Featherstone brought the cup home, and sitting on my dad's shoulders watching, the team go through Featherstone. So it was a very memorable, it was a mining village, and it was the rugby league that I can remember. Never at school, I never had opportunity to play it. Girls didn't, and I didn't like PE. You used to run around in navy blue knickers, and I was quite. I want a big lass, but I want a dainty lass, and I didn't want to do it. So I was one that used to bring my letters on to school to say I don't want to do PE. It was the last thing that I thought I would ever want to get involved in. And then when it came to leaving school, I'd moved to Castleford at that point with my mum. My mum and my brothers, we moved to Castleford, but I continued going to school at Featherstone. And there was this, I can remember the careers advice was almost non-existent, and particularly for girls. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And there was this kind of acceptance that girls don't have a career, that, you go into a factory, you get married, and you have children, and that was what, so it was like factory work was something that was going to go. Anyway, what I did is I ended up getting married at 16, and at 17 I had a daughter. At 20 I was divorced, and a one-parent family. Married again at 22 or 23, and then I had a son, and then I was single again when I was 7 months pregnant, so I had 2 children on my own, reliant on social security. So that's how I ended up. I was, in my early 20s with 2 young children, and really struggling at the time. It was the time, I think it was Thatcher was in government at the time, and you were almost like a class underneath class. You were. I lived in a mining community in Castleford, but there was no prospects. I was a single parent, no income, living in something like 30 quid a week. And by accident, I got involved it was through social services actually, got involved in a local community centre just around the corner from where I lived. And because I didn't go to school in Castleford, I didn't know many people in Castleford. All my friends were in Featherstone. So I was quite, isolated. And I went to this community centre, and I joined a women's group on a Friday afternoon, and they had a creche. So I used to go along, and we started doing some keep fit sessions, and because it was a creche, I could go, and I quite enjoyed them. And they were run by Wakefield Council by a woman called Carol Brady. And it was a new programme funded by Action Sport, which was a Sport England initiative to get underrepresented communities into sport or physical activity. And after 6 weeks of going to this class, Carol gave me a ghetto blaster and said, "You lead the class." And I said, "Well, I don't know what I'm doing. What? I don't know." So I went on to they funded me to go on a Sports Leaders Award, and then the community centre raised money for me to go on to a RSA YMCA exercise to music qualification. It was new at the time, and it was where you would go teach. And they were doing sponsored events and things, so they paid for the qualification. Local dentist gave me 100 quid towards it, and they bought me a new pair of trainers and a new kit, and I went on to this qualification. And then I then went and was delivering local sessions in the community centre of exercise to music. And within 6 months, Action Sport offered me a job as a recreation assistant. So, and I actually was financially worse off because for taking it, because I lost my benefits and I had dinners, but I just wanted to get into work. And then and that's when I met the local rugby league development officer, Martin Ward. He was working for the council's recreation department at the time, sports development department, and I was a recreation assistant. And then Action Sport teamed up with Martin, who was the rugby league development officer, to do 3 women's taster sessions in Wakefield District, Women's Rugby League. And I thought, oh, this is great. I've watched it all my life, never had a chance to play it. I thought, oh, brilliant. And my job was to get the minibus and go pick women up from the district that I was working with. And we had 3 taster sessions, one at Castleford, one at Featherstone. I think there was one at Wakefield. And from those taster sessions were 3 women's teams formed. Wakefield Panthers, and I was a founder member of Wakefield Panthers. Redhill women, and Redhill formed, and Castleford, and they formed separately because they didn't have transport to go to one venue. So in the district, we formed Wakefield Panthers, Redhill, and Castleford. And that's when Martin threw me a pair of boots and said, "Right, we're gonna start playing." And I can remember that was 89. That was the kind of late 89, and then 1990 we formed the team, Wakefield Panthers, and it was brilliant. It was like physical. It was skill was limited at the time, but I did it because of camaraderie. Other women wanted to play it. It was great. It was something I always wanted to do. I didn't know I wanted to do it until I had opportunity to do it. And then, and I can remember we had our first training sessions, and we were based at a place called Hark to the Mopsy in Wakefield. It was basically a pub with a training ground, and we eventually moved to Featherstone Sports Centre. But in the March, Martin organised a game against Guiseley, and they were the National League Cup winners, just to test how we went on. and we got absolutely flopped. I think it was something like 40-odd 8. Not sure what that might be 40-odd 6 in the match.
That's minimal compared to what Anne Thompson's been talking about with
Yeah.
Vixens.
And then he says, right, then we know what we've got to do now. We hadn't joined the association, the National Association at the time, but you know what the standard is. So we seriously start training. We had an influx of players from the handball, which was Brenda Dobeck, Julie Wells, Sue Hayward, Julie Parrish, and Shelley Land. 5 players came from handball, and we started working. And I've got the file here. And then I think it was in the June of that year, from January to June, we played Guiseley on their home territory, and we beat them 38-6.
Wow!
And they were the National Cup winners, and that earned us in the National 1 League division of the Women's Rugby League Association. So we entered in the September the National 1. And then from there on, we remained unbeaten. We were the National Cup winners for 7 years, unbeaten for 7 years. We were National Cup winners, I think, for years on, but we were unbeaten for 7 years. Redhill moved into Division 1 as well. I think Castleford were in Division 1. So all 3 teams kind of went in. And that's really how I started playing. So I was playing for Wakefield Panthers. I formed a girls' team, under 16s. I started to get actively politically involved in the Women's Rugby League Association. So it was run predominantly by men at the time, which is fine because men had a lot of contribution to make. But there was very limited vision for the development of the league at the time, and that's when I encountered Anne Thompson. I was coaching Hull at the time, and we had some really great discussions about, our vision that, women should be playing 13-a-side. We're only playing 11-a-side. There were struggles with the recruitment, and we wanted, we had so much aspirations that women could do in the game, but it was limited by the opportunities in terms of the competition. And Anne and I became great friends, and we stood up for chair and secretary of the Women's National League Association. I think it was around, must have been 92, 93-ish time. And we were defeated. We were absolutely defeated. But what I did manage to do, because at that time I was still working in sports development, so I was accessing pockets of money. So I managed to get some money for a development forum, and it was held in Shelf. And we got about 60 representatives from the women's game to come to this development forum. And it was funded partly by the RFL. Well, it was funded by the RFL. And I was kind of getting proactive in women's sport generally, because I moved to Calderdale as the women's development officer, developing women's sport in Calderdale. So I was getting quite active in the women's development of sports development. And I came across a woman called Celia Brackenridge, which was she's a stalwart in women's sport. And she facilitated this event. And we basically went to the women's teams and said, what do you want for you? What do you want? And they wanted to play 13-a-side. They wanted divisions. They wanted a girls' rugby league association. They wanted more female coaches. They wanted more people in refereeing and administration. And they had a vision. So we put together a development plan. But the league chair and the secretary at the time didn't like this. They kind of actively sent a letter around to all the teams to say, we were it was unthinkable that women could become coaches, that women could become referees, that women could administrate. All we want to do is just play a game on a Sunday afternoon and then go home and cook Sunday dinner, etc. But they then resigned later on that year, and Anne and I stepped up as chair and secretary. So I became involved as a secretary. I became a coach. I got a level 2 qualification, level 3, and I eventually became the first woman to get the RFL level 4 coaching qualification. Along this period, I coached Yorkshire. And then in 1995, I was secretary of the Women's Rugby League Association. We got a letter from Australia saying, would you form a team and go out and play Australia? So the Women's Rugby League Committee formed a development group. Anne and I was involved in that. We recruited a head coach, who was Ian Harris at the time. Anne and I became assistant coaches to the Great Britain team. We formed a team. We went out in 1996. We raised £80,000 in funding. Part of that was 30-odd thousand from the Sports Council at the time, Sports and Arts Foundation, which I kind of got the grant for that. We went out there and beat Australia in 1996. And it was just amazing. It was just, it was like, where did all this come from? We had, and then Anne and I and a woman I was working with, a colleague, well, she was my boss at the time in Doncaster, I was Doncaster Sports Development, arranged a meeting with Sport England at the time and said, look, the women have gone and done this, something the men hadn't done for 20 years. And we get very little funding. At that time, well, it's still now that sports get 4-year funding. And I think the women was only getting it through BARLA. I think they were getting it wasn't a lot. It was less than £1,000 a year for women's development. So Sport England said, write a development programme. Our liaison officer was Robin Barron at the time. And he said, write a development programme, 4-year development programme, and submit it as part of the Rugby League's 4-year funding bid. So on behalf of WALA, consulted with WALA and used the information from the forum to write the development plan, and we secured funding for a national development officer, specifically for the women's game. And I was seconded from Doncaster into that role as the first national development officer for Women's Rugby League, associated with the under the RFL. And I was seconded for a year, and then I was then openly recruited into the post after a year. So that was kind of how I moved professionally into rugby league. Mm-hmm. So that's really how I got started. I then went on to become head coach to the Great Britain team. So I coached the national side through 5 international competitions, including 98 against New Zealand. We did the World Series in this country against New Zealand and Australia. And I not only coached, but I managed it all in my day job. And I never got paid for any coaching. None of my coaching was ever paid for. It was all volunteer. And then we went out to Australia again in 2002 and then New Zealand in 2003. And then I left rugby league in 2003 to work in wider sport, but still kind of got involved in developing the coach ed qualifications with the RFL through First for Sport at the time I was working for. So I kind of been involved in different ways and different roles, if you like.
And you think from that seed of the wanting to get women from unrepresented groups into doing something, what on the way as a woman in what obviously is and particularly at that time, there was no other women doing what you were doing, or very few women. There was the likes of Anne and various other people sort of potted around. Luckily you and Anne found each other. What was it like for you? What were the difficulties as you as a woman coming through that, and what were the barriers?
The barriers for me, my personal, and this is probably how I am really, is the playing bit was almost, maybe it's from the communities that I came from, is that women have been involved in rugby league in different forms. At grassroots level, they often support the kids, they often involved as supporters, administrators. It was novel that women wanted to play, and I didn't encounter many barriers. It was like, it wasn't taken seriously, and a lot of my family didn't come to watch. My dad loved it. My dad followed us all over the place. So the playing bit to me was the easy bit, in that sense of people accepted we were doing it. They probably didn't. Some didn't agree, but we didn't get. I did personally get the resistance to the playing. It was when I moved into the administration and the coaching, and into the RFL itself and the BARLA, women shouldn't be here. What's a woman? can tell you there was a meeting when RFL was first writing its performance plan, and Sport England held a meeting at, I think it was Barla offices, and the RFL performance director was there. You know, Barla was represented, and I as a national development officer involved in GB was invited to the meeting along with Sport England, and the Barla chair at the time said, "What's she doing here? You know, she's not in this meeting." And Sport England said, "This is my meeting, our meeting." She will, you know, so it was that resistance. It was like, you know, it was a resistance on funding. It was that, you know, we'd get piecemeal funding, access to facilities. You know, women would play on the poor pitches. They get the referees that were spare at the time, and it was the logistics of playing. It was the resources, and it was the acceptance that women could be a coach, could be a referee, could be administrator. You know, that we wanted to progress further than just playing. And I think that to me was where the real tough things were, and raising money. You know, we did 5 internationals, and whilst the governing body contributed, the majority of that was raised by the women and by myself, and through grants and funding and all that kind of stuff. And it was that side of it that was really tough.
And I'm really interested in when you became the development officer and when you were actively involved in WALA. Where did that sit within the governing body, and was it inclusive?
The Women's Rugby League Association was outside of BALA at the time. I think rugby union was the same, and where the women's competition was run purely by the Women's Rugby League Association and a women's organisation. It wasn't affiliated to BALA at the time when I joined, but we came under the amateur arm, because RFL at the time there was 2 governing bodies. There's one, BALA was the the amateur governing body, and then RFL was the national body for the professional side. And because the women came under BALA, but we were not affiliated, so so we were kind of totally financed by ourselves, and the WALA committee was elected from representatives from, you know, formal AGM, from representatives from the women's teams at the time, and I think they made a lot of progress. I think at the time when we were moving forward, there was a benefit to be outside of the RFL and the BALA, because we operated, you know, we were able to seek funding, we were able to make our rules, we were able to, and there wasn't as many limitations. But then, having said that, there was no recognition, and there was no benefits of being encompassed within a national governing body as a recognised part of that. When I was the National Development Officer, I was invited to attend the BALA meetings, but we had no vote, and I used to turn up, and I often didn't have anything to contribute to the agenda, but I made sure I went to every meeting. And then about 6 months after, 6 months into those meetings, because I was a regular member there, you know, somebody said, "Oh, Jackie, what do you think?" And all right, okay. And then on the back of that, we got associate membership of BALA on the back of having that representation there. And I didn't sense bad feeling, but it was just almost not the norm that women were involved in decision making and had that, you know, the right to kind of input into the development of the game as a whole. And that was a battle, you know, to have a voice basically on behalf of Women's Rugby League and the women who wanted to play. And
this was sort of mid 90s, wasn't it?
Mid 90s, yeah.
Yeah.
So in 96, we were still under the WALA committee.
Yeah.
And in fact, even when I left in 2003, we were still under WALA. And I think it was after that we got that WALA got taken on under the RFL, because at the time during the 90s, I think there was this rationalisation programme by Sport England to say it wasn't just rugby league, it was lots of governing bodies had different structures, so there was more than one governing body within a sport, and they wanted them to join. So there's a real kind of a lot of work going on for BALA and RFL to kind of merge into a governing body, and then to look at the territory of what the BALA would cover. And I think so there was that going on. And then I think later on women got taken on by the RFL under that banner.
Yeah, I
But
think
that
it
was
was
after my time in sport.
yeah, I was going to say it was a lot later, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So you were sort of part of BALA, weren't you? And
yeah.
did it get easier as you got your recognition of what the work you were doing within BALA, and did they get more supportive?
Well, my post was actually under the RFL. So I had a lot of work in, my manager was an RFL, my post was under the Women's Rugby League Association, was separate. I'd like to say yes, but I don't think so, because I think the more with GB, what we use GB as a catalyst to develop. So it wasn't just about going out and playing. We used the competitions, for instance, in 2000. I managed to work with 6 local authorities to sponsor each of the games. We had no budget for this. They sponsored each of the games. So Hull, Wakefield, Leeds, Warrington, I think Rochdale, they sponsored the games. So the games were paid for on that. On the back of, I would write a development programme with the women's teams in those areas, and we would put in for local grants. And those local grants would pay for women to become qualified as coaches in the teams. They would do a 6-week programme in schools, and they'd form a girls' team at the club. On the back of that work in 2000, we had 80 female coaches qualified at level 1 or 2. We had 16 new girls' teams formed. And we raised something like over £80,000 of external funding for that development programme. So we used the competition in GB as a catalyst to develop. And I think that became more recognised. And the other thing, I used it for media. So every opportunity I could, we would try and raise the profile. So using the players, using the events that we were running. And as that became, we had a double spread in the Sun. Because the Sun newspaper came to a GB camp at Catterick. So we held a GB camp at an army camp. They came along, and we were on Moment of Truth, Phil Black's Moment of Truth. I got a phone call. Do you want to raise £5,000? Yeah. What do we have to do? And it gave us a profile. And I think as the profile raised, we were getting more recognition. And I think we were getting recognition from the clubs as well. People who say, the games in 2000 were fantastic. People were saying, wow, those were great games. In fact, the Independent ran an article about the top. We were part of the Men's World Cup in 2000, and the top 5 games in the whole competition, we were the 5th out of the whole competition, men and women. And I think it was the GB v Australia game at Dewsbury. And the review of that was, it was a genuine technical, it was like a credible performance, and it was recognised as a credible. It wasn't a novelty. It was like, these women are playing rugby league, and what a showcase of a game. And it was starting to happen. And then I got involved. I kind of trained under David Waite in the performance camps, and was working on the male performance camps, the junior camps as well. So I was kind of getting myself as a coach in with the performance coaching, with the men's performance coaching. So it wasn't just on the women's side, I was, and I learned so much off David Waite as well. I think, the moments where my coaching really kind of advanced was under people like David Waite, Simon Worsnott, Ray Unsworth. I wasn't just confining myself to the women's game. I was trying to work out how I get better as a person, as a coach. And and it's same as GB. I didn't ask people. A lot of people, volunteers got involved, but these volunteers were very professional people. I went for the best and said, I couldn't pay you, but will you help us? And we had some great experts that came in. Paula Clark, physiotherapist, Nikki Carter, a credible administrator, Roland Davis used to work for the RFL, came in and did administration. We had a lot of highly qualified people that volunteered their time, and that made a difference because we stepped up. The performances at GB, we won in 96, 98, we got flopped. That was the biggest learning curve for me. And I wanted to pack in at the time. I said, I said to Ray Unsworth, who was the coaching director at the time, and I said, Ray, I can't do this. And he says, no, we'll mentor you. And the difference between 98 and 2000, the performances, the team, physically and technically, the capabilities just went up. And I think as that started to grow and develop, we were getting more credibility. Me as a coach, and also the GB team and the profile of the game. So that was a real step difference in where we moved it to. There were, and at that time, when you think about women's sport at the time, there were a lot of barriers, and there still are quite a few barriers still, but we were tackling them as they came along, really, in the ways that we could, and the resources that we had to use.
It's really interesting, isn't it, when you say that, that there still are barriers. When you look at what's happening now in not just rugby league, but women's sports, what do you see, the difference is that's making it much more of a success and growth?
I think the recognition of women's sport, the profile. I mean, you've got football, rugby union, rugby league on the TV now. Mm-hmm. I mean, we occasionally got 2 minutes. You get full games. You're getting audiences come in. To actually showcase the game and to show that women can play sport. Credibly. Olympics, obviously. I've always watched the Olympics, and but team sports, it's been, I think, more challenging in team sports for females, particularly male-dominated sports. Mm-hmm. So in terms of, I think the profiles made a difference, and I think governing body funding makes a difference. Mm-hmm. We were raising money. We can do so much. I think we've still got a long way to go, particularly in rugby league. I do think, it's great to see, the games on the TV. It's great to see the Super League teams adopting the women's game. It's great to see, female commentators on the TV as well. What I have more concerns about is still the resourcing at the team level. I've kind of connections with one of the teams at the moment, and still, the female players are not full-time paid. They've still got to hold jobs down. They've still got families. Will it ever get to that point where they're going to be fully professional? I see some teams struggling for facilities. Where are all the female coaches? 80 qualified in 2000. Where are all the female coaches now? In the governing body itself, where are the women administrators? It's very still male dominated. So in terms of that aspect of it, I think we've still got a long way to go. Because it's important that women are involved in the decision-making process within the governing body. Referees. Julia, you had a great career as referees. How so the playing and the visibility and the funding is coming into the sport, the recognition with the Super League teams, but still some fundamental things. I know the women's and teams are growing, but I don't think there's that many more now than there was when I was involved in 2003. I've got we had 16 girls teams in a girls rugby league association. I don't see the structures in terms of the grassroots level growing, and then I wonder about the investment. And it's okay qualifying women as coaches, but what opportunities do they have to coach? And credible coaching, not just the bits that nobody else wants. It's like, what's their what's their pathway to get better as a coach, administrator, referee, all these kind of things. So yes, I think it's moving forward. You know, the fact that, you know, the English players are moving out to Australia to play. And if you look at the developments of Australia, the Australian, back in when I was involved, we beat Australia a number of times. We were far in advance of the development then. It was recognised by Australia. We never managed to beat New Zealand, but we came within 10 points difference in 2000, which was a massive stride. But we had far more youth coming through. We had an under-19s England squad that was, and two or three of the Great Britain players, Lisa and Sam Bailey, were coaching the teams, and they were mirroring the GB. And when I went out in 2003, we didn't. We had a lot of young players coming through, and New Zealand said, "Where have you got all this youth from?" We were far in advance. And now, if you look at where we are in the women's game and where Australia have moved to, we've got a lot of catching up, I think, to do. So they're the questions I think rugby league has to ask itself about female development in the sport. It's, you know, if you want real equality about and opportunities, I think, you know, yes, we're moving forward, but at what pace, and also in what areas, I think. So that's my take on it at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look back at what you did, what's your proudest moment or proudest thing that you've done within the sport?
Well, there's a couple of points really where, you know, you have to pinch yourself. Like in '96 when we went out there, it was a dream. You know, we never thought we'd come and bring the cup back. It was like, whoa, what's happening here? So obviously that was a moment where, and it was a catalyst to get resources in to develop the game. As a coach, from a coach point of view, 2002, I'd done a lot of work and a lot of personal development as a coach, learning off mentors, you know, Simon Worsnop, Ray, you know, David Waite, and learning. My coaching really took off, and the players had been in the system like 6 years, and they were really physically and technically getting better. And the first opening game in Australia, we beat Australia by 26-12, and it would have been more if we'd made the kicks, but that to me was, whoa, that is a significant, you know, it wasn't like 2 points difference, it wasn't 4, it was 26-12, it was, whoa, this is working, and look at the difference in the team. I was so proud of that. And then the other moments I have, like when we had our presentation as part of the World Cup that's just gone, and you sit in the room and you hear all the stories of how these players have come through and what difference it made to their lives. You know, we've got one player that's gone to competes in the world's strongest woman competition. You know, you've got people moving into professional careers as a result of what they've learned from GB. You hear the stories, and I just thought, wow, that makes me proud, because that's what it was about. And I think that's probably the difference that you make by creating these opportunities. And to be honest, you know, being involved in rugby league, I've travelled the world really. I've been to Australia, New Zealand, and I've had a career outside rugby league in sport. You know, I've worked in Olympic, Paralympic sports. I've worked in a CEO and a performance director, and that's taken me to, you know, I've been to Sochi, Olympics, and Rio, and that. The beginning bit, you know, my confidence and my knowledge, the grounding I got, opened a career for me. And then on the other side of it all as well, it showed my children, as I was a one-parent family, that my life and my future isn't about sitting on social, you know, on benefits. It was about, well, we can do something about this. And it was just those moments where opportunities came along and I took them. And so there's different points where you think, wow, they're moments that you never forget, and the proud moments in different contexts, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at where you've come from and your background and, that mining community and how you've achieved, not just in rugby league, but in so many other sports, that and your coaching background, which has helped you with your leadership and your skills within what you do, is phenomenal. And you need recognizing for that. And I'm so pleased that you've mentioned that in your achievements, because what you've done has, is you are a pioneer, in really difficult circumstances. And I often, when we were together in that early 90s and 2000, it was a tough gig, because they didn't want to hear about women's rugby league. They played lip service. It was always, you had to shout out about, don't forget the women. And so many times you had to say, and what about the women? Because they were never actually thought of in the bigger picture, and that's time consuming, and all that money you raised and lives you've touched. I think the thing that always, with someone that's a coach or someone that educates himself in order to help other people, and touches so many lives, is a really special thing.
And the thing is, Julia, at the time, I didn't think I was doing anything special. What I thought at the time was, I have a right to do this. Women have a right to do this. And we can stand up and ask for the right. And so it's not everybody's cup of tea, playing rugby league, but for those that wanted to, it was a right to have equality of opportunity. And so it didn't feel like, I'm championing anything. It was about saying, we've a right to do this. And where's our opportunity, and standing up for that and having a voice there in the decision making. And sometimes it's about being patient. It's not always banging on the table and saying we want. It's about, okay, we've got to integrate into this in a way, and it's probably developing those skills. So I'm not the person now as I was 24 years or 25 years ago. You learn along the way, and it does, it does impact on your life. And I think the other thing, going back to the events in was it 2022? Yeah. When we all met, I hadn't seen these players and people for like 20 years, and it was just like we were back 20 years again. You met lifelong friends, and you make, all on the same journey. And it was just going back 20 years. It was just like there was no time difference, in that sense. So that's what it's given me. You're giving your lifelong, I feel I could contact them and easily, be welcomed. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and you have impacted on so many lives, and made a difference to so many people, and set the platform for where the sport is now. So Jackie, thank you so much for your time. That was absolutely brilliant. And I just want to personally thank you for all the work you've done and continue to do, because you're still doing work in the game and helping and supporting, and obviously with everything that you've done for people in the past. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the interview.
Brilliant, thank you.